The Sea Peoples, mystery raiders of the Bronze Age.
The ships appeared on the horizon like harbingers of doom.
Strange vessels with bird-headed prows, carrying warriors unlike any the ancient world had seen.
In a matter of decades, they would topple empires that had stood for centuries, burn cities to ash, and plunge civilization into darkness.
The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. History would remember them as the destroyers of worlds.
Imagine a world on the brink. It's 1200 BCE, and the great empires of the Bronze Age stand tall, rich, and seemingly unshakable.
Egypt rules the Nile with divine authority.
The Hittites command vast territories from their mountain strongholds. The Mycenaeans control the wide dark seas of Homer's imagination. But across the horizon, sails appear.
Unknown warriors descend from the sea, entire nations packed onto ships. They don't come to trade, they come to burn.
And in just a few decades, the ancient world will collapse into fire and silence.
These were the Sea Peoples, the mystery raiders who changed history forever.
The Bronze Age world, picture this. It's 1200 BCE. The Bronze Age world is about to end, not with a whimper, but with the thunder of war drums and the crash of ships against ancient shores.
Across the Eastern Mediterranean, the greatest civilizations humanity has ever known are about to face their darkest hour.
The Hittites, masters of iron and diplomacy. The Mycenaeans, the real-life inspiration for Homer's heroes.
The wealthy trading cities of the Levant. All of them are about to encounter an enemy unlike any they've faced before.
They come from the sea. They strike without warning.
They leave nothing but ash and ruin in their wake. History will remember them simply as the Sea Peoples. To understand the magnitude of what the Sea Peoples destroyed, we need to appreciate what the late Bronze Age Mediterranean looked like before they arrived.
This wasn't some collection of primitive villages. This was a sophisticated, interconnected world that wouldn't be matched again for centuries. The Hittite Empire controlled most of modern-day Turkey and challenged Egypt for supremacy.
Their capital, Hattusa, boasted massive stone fortifications and a royal library containing thousands of cuneiform tablets. These weren't barbarians.
They were the first people to master ironworking on an industrial scale, and their diplomacy was so sophisticated that they signed what many consider the world's first peace treaty with Egypt.
Down in Greece, the Mycenaeans had built a palace-centered civilization that controlled trade routes across the Aegean.
Their massive fortresses at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos were engineering marvels, built with stones so large that later Greeks thought they must have been constructed by giants. The Cyclops themselves, and along the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, trading cities like Ugarit had grown wealthy beyond imagination.
Ugarit was like the New York City of the Bronze Age, a cosmopolitan hub where merchants from across the known world came to trade everything from Baltic amber to African ivory. They even had their own simplified alphabet, a revolutionary innovation that made writing accessible to more than just scribes. All of these civilizations were connected by an intricate web of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Pharaoh's daughter might marry a Hittite prince. Mycenaean pottery found its way to Egypt. Mesopotamian texts were copied in Hittite libraries. It was globalization, Bronze Age style.
And then, seemingly overnight, it all came crashing down. The storm from the sea of primary sources for the Sea Peoples come from Egyptian records, carved into temple walls by pharaohs who faced these mysterious invaders.
The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, thank the gods, because without their accounts, we'd know almost nothing about these raiders who changed history.
The first major mention comes during the reign of Pharaoh Merneptah around 1208 BCE.
His scribes describe a massive invasion. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands.
All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray.
No land could stand before their arms. But here's what makes the Sea Peoples different from your typical ancient raiders. They weren't just warriors looking for quick plunder. Egyptian reliefs show them traveling with ox carts full of women, children, and household goods.
These weren't hit-and-run pirates.
These were entire populations on the move, armed and desperate, looking for new homes. The Egyptians gave them names. The Peliset, who many scholars believe became the biblical Philistines.
The Cheka, the Shekelish, the Denyen, and the Weshish. Each group likely represented different tribes or regions, united temporarily by circumstance and desperation. Their ships were different too. Egyptian artists depicted vessels with distinctive bird-head prows and high stern posts, completely unlike traditional Mediterranean designs. These ships could carry both warriors and families, built for long voyages and capable of beach assaults. The Great Destruction. What happened next reads like an ancient apocalypse.
Starting around 1200 BCE, one by one, the great centers of Bronze Age civilization began to fall.
The Hittite Empire, which had stood toe-to-toe with Egypt for centuries, simply vanished. Hattusa was burned so thoroughly that archaeologists have found layers of ash and destruction across the entire site.
The empire that had controlled Anatolia for over 4 centuries was gone in what seems like a single generation. In Greece, the Mycenaean palaces met similar fates.
Pylos was destroyed by fire, Tyrenes abandoned. Mycenae itself, the golden city of Agamemnon, fell into ruins. The sophisticated administrative system collapsed so completely that the Greeks forgot how to write for centuries, what we call the Greek Dark Ages.
But perhaps no destruction was more poignant than Ugarit.
We have an actual letter from the last king of Ugarit, desperately pleading for help as enemy ships approach his harbor. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the Hittite country, and all my ships are in the land of Lacca?
They have not arrived back, and the country is abandoned to itself.
That letter was never sent.
Ugarit was destroyed so completely that it was never rebuilt.
This thriving metropolis, home to merchants and scribes, artists and diplomats, was reduced to ash and rubble. The Egyptian bulwark, but Egypt was different. When the Sea Peoples came for the land of the pharaohs, they met their match. Ramesses III, arguably the last great pharaoh of Egypt, faced the full fury of the Sea Peoples around 1175 BCE.
His account, carved on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, is one of the most dramatic military narratives from the ancient world. They came from their islands and mainlands, confident in their arms.
They were prepared, the pharaoh's scribes recorded, but Ramesses was ready for them.
He had learned from earlier attacks and prepared both land and naval defenses. The Egyptian reliefs show us the world's first recorded naval battle in detail. Egyptian ships, fighting close to shore with support from archers on land, engaged the Sea People's distinctive vessels in what must have been an epic confrontation. The Egyptians show their enemies falling into the water, being captured, or fleeing in defeat.
On land, Ramesses' forces used coordinated infantry and chariot attacks to break up the Sea People's formations.
The pharaoh himself is shown trampling enemies underfoot, though this was probably artistic ascents rather than historical fact.
The victory was complete, but costly.
Egypt survived, but the effort exhausted the kingdom's resources and marked the beginning of its long, slow decline from great power status.
Who were they really?
So who were these mysterious Sea Peoples?
Where did they come from? And why did they suddenly appear as a devastating force across the Mediterranean? Modern scholarship has moved away from the old theory that they were simply barbarian raiders from the north. Instead, most historians now see them as symptoms of a much larger crisis, what we call the Late Bronze Age collapse.
Climate data suggests that the Eastern Mediterranean experienced severe droughts and climate instability around this time. Archaeological evidence shows earthquake damage across many sites.
The sophisticated trade networks that had enriched Bronze Age civilizations were breaking down, possibly due to political instability or piracy.
The Sea Peoples may have been populations displaced by these disasters. Refugees turned raiders out of desperation.
Some may have originated in Anatolia, fleeing the collapse of the Hittite Empire. Others might have come from the Aegean Islands or even Italy, driven by crop failures or political upheaval. What made them dangerous wasn't necessarily superior weapons or tactics, but their timing. They struck at civilizations already weakened by internal problems, climate stress, and economic disruption.
They were the final blow that brought down an already tottering system.
The Legacythe aftermath of the Sea People's rampage reshaped the ancient world. The Bronze Age was over.
The Iron Age had begun.
Some of the Sea Peoples settled in the lands they had conquered. The Peliset became the Philistines of biblical fame, settling along the coast of what's now Israel and Gaza. They brought with them new pottery styles, architectural techniques, and probably some of the military innovations that had made them so formidable. The destruction of the old palace-centered economies led to the rise of smaller, more flexible city-states. In the vacuum left by Mycenaean Greece's collapse, new Greek communities began to emerge, communities that would eventually give birth to classical Greek civilization. The collapse of Hittite power allowed new peoples to emerge in Anatolia and Syria. The destruction of Ugarit and other trading centers shifted commercial networks and led to the rise of the Phoenicians as the Mediterranean's premier merchants and navigators.
The Sea Peoples remain one of history's great mysteries. We may never know exactly who they were, where they came from, or why they appeared when they did.
What we do know is that their brief, violent passage through history marked one of the great turning points of human civilization.
They remind us that even the mightiest civilizations are fragile things.
The Bronze Age Mediterranean seemed eternal to those who lived in it. A complex, sophisticated world that had endured for centuries.
Yet it all came crashing down in what may have been just a few decades of crisis and conflict. The Sea Peoples show us how quickly the seemingly permanent can become dust and memory. But they also show us something else, that from destruction can come renewal. The world that emerged from the late Bronze Age collapse would eventually give us classical Greece, the Hebrew Bible, the Phoenician alphabet, and the foundations of Western civilization.
Sometimes, to build something new, you first have to tear down what came before. The Sea Peoples may have been destroyers, but they were also, unknowingly, creators of the world that would follow. History, after all, is written by the survivors, and we are their legacy. Thanks for listening.